When people ask me for a horror movie recommendation, the first film that I always suggest is a criminally underseen gem called Pontypool. That's a zombie outbreak film that's told entirely from the point of view of a radio host, so all the action is left to eyewitness reports from the people calling in and describing the gruesome scene. Believe it or not, this is actually the exact same setup for the new game Killer Frequency. Only instead of a zombie apocalypse, there's a serial killer on the loose. This is a high-stakes thriller where we try to help callers survive in between playing the hottest 1980s hits. Yeah, that's a cool concept, but is this game as good as Pontypool? Find out now when I review Killer Frequency from Team 17. It's the late 1980s, and you play Forrest Nash, a big-time disc jockey who just recently downgraded from Chicago to a small rural community known as Gallows Creek. He's a DJ who's used to having an audience of 35 million listeners, but at KFAM 189.16 FM The Scream, he's now averaging around 35. Not 35,000 or even 3,500, just 35. Yeah, things have taken a real downturn for the radio host. What Forrest doesn't realize yet is that his night is about to get a whole lot worse after Gallows Creek is plagued by a series of murders. In a panic, the city's last remaining emergency worker calls into the radio station to let us know that there's nobody manning the 911 hotline, which means that all emergency calls are going to be redirected straight into Forrest's early morning radio show. We are the only line of defense as the officer makes the 2-hour drive to the next city over in an effort to recruit some help. It's up to Forrest and his good-natured producer Peggy to help the good people of Gallows Creek escape the masked killer that is actively hunting down fresh victims. This is one of those games where you can't help but feel incredibly helpless for a good chunk of time. Forrest is a down-on-his-luck DJ, not a cop or a fireman or a survival expert. He can barely keep his career alive, let alone a caller who's being chased by a serial killer. And with that mindset, the first couple of people who called the radio station met what can best be described as a grisly demise. However, as the calls started to pile up, I found my groove and actually started to save people, giving me a real boost of confidence. Typically, a possible victim calls in looking for aid that is specific to their scenario. A good example of this is a guy who finds himself stuck in the middle of the city's complicated hedge maze. You'll find a useful map in the radio station, along with a helpful cheat sheet of the landmarks to look out for when navigating your way out of the maze. Following the map and paying attention to the information given, we direct the caller out of the maze into safety. But watch out, because one wrong move will send him straight into the serial killer's knife. Of course, not all calls are like that, though most of them revolve around you picking up an item that can be found somewhere in the radio station. We'll slowly unlock new parts of the building, revealing a mystery that is a whole lot bigger than just a couple of small-town murders. You're suddenly being asked to piece actual evidence together in order to predict the killer's next steps, which will force you to confront the city's seedier secrets. It all culminates in an unforgettable ending that doesn't let you off the hook for your actions. Whether you save the townspeople or not, the ending is incredibly satisfying, leaving you with a real sense of accomplishment. That's one of the things that I like the most about Killer Frequency. It's easy to forget that this is a video game and not a real situation, creating a lot of tense calls where you're genuinely scared to say or do the wrong thing. That feeling of success when you help somebody avoid certain doom is real and intoxicating. But the realization that your actions led directly to somebody's murder can be heartbreaking at times. The game does a great job of stringing you along, only to rip out your heart at a crucial moment. This game is a roller coaster ride full of stress and emotions, leaving me with a brief 4-hour adventure that I'm never going to forget. The reason any of this works so well is because of the sharp writing and strong voice acting. Josh Cowdery is believable as a seasoned radio host, and I love Forrest's banter with Peggy. Their concern for the people of Gallows Creek is always believable, and the anxiety in their voice helps to sell the stakes of the story. The game's also good about adding just enough moments of levity to break up the tension. There's an especially funny on-running gag where a local pizzeria keeps calling into the radio station in hope of scoring free advertising, a joke that made me laugh every single time. There's a great selection of voices and characters, allowing the game to be both goofy and deadly serious. Now, Killer Frequency reminds me a lot of Not for Broadcast, a full-motion video game that came out last year that had you manning a control booth at a local television station. This game isn't as stringent when it comes to actually doing your job, as the emphasis here is on the story and the mystery. For example, there's a whole bay full of sound effects that you're probably never going to use. Honestly, the same is true for the volume sliders. If this were a real radio station, we would use the slider to fade out of a song and into a phone call. But you can pretty much stop the song midway through and nobody cares. If you go in expecting this to be a simulator, then you might end up being disappointed with Killer Frequency. That was not a problem for me, because I found myself enjoying this almost as much as Not for Broadcast. A lot of the reason for this is because both games managed to scratch a very specific itch. They both give me an experience I've never seen before in a video game, all while feeding me an intelligent and captivating story that I'm going to be thinking about for weeks and months to come. Look, I get it. I can understand if somebody looks at my high scores of both of these games and is confused. But Killer Frequency is the exact type of new experience that I'm constantly looking for in a video game. I wish all games were as inventive as this one. Now, there are a couple of things that I could probably nitpick. I wish that we had learned more about Forrest's backstory and what brought him to Gallows Creek. That's something that's certainly hinted at, but it's never really addressed. Also, for a game that takes place in rural America in the 1980s, a lot of people sure seem to have cell phones. This is never actually addressed in the game, but there are so many calls that would be impossible with a standard landline. A perfect example of what I'm talking about is that hedge maze call that I mentioned earlier. Here's a guy who is literally stuck in the middle of a giant maze, keeping us up to date with every move he makes. Yeah, that's something that you can do with a cell phone, but not a landline. There are a lot of moments like that where we're following a character while they're on the move, way outside of where a cord or even a cordless signal could reach. Sure, this makes the survival situations a lot more exciting, but it's always at the expense of believability. It's also worth pointing out that some of the puzzles feel more like a scavenger hunt than anything else, which can mean searching the radio station for a small item or a slip of paper. The good news is the game is usually pretty good about giving you enough clues to where to find what you're looking for, but digging through the closets and garbage cans is just not as interesting as engaging callers on the phone. I mean, the radio station is definitely cool and interesting, but not as exciting as actually saving the people of Gallows Creek. That said, it's not like there's another game on the market that takes this concept and does it any better. Sure, I can nitpick a few issues here and there, but Killer Frequency delivers on everything that it sets out to accomplish. This is a tense and complicated thriller with the right amount of danger and comedy. The puzzles are unique and constantly requiring different skills, and you're definitely going to suffer some real setbacks while live on the air. And while that can certainly be heartbreaking at times, the thrill of actually saving somebody's life is every bit as intoxicating as it is satisfying. Few games have made me feel as good as Killer Frequency, this year or ever. Don't touch that dial, because one of the year's best games takes place in the sleepy city of Gallows Creek. Killer Frequency puts you in the shoes of a radio DJ who's forced to help save the townsfolk from a masked serial killer. This is a tense, deadly, and often comical thriller that shows the wrath of a slasher from an entirely new perspective. With a smart script, fantastic twists, great characters, top-notch voice acting, and a surprising amount of depth to the survival scenarios, this is more than just Halloween the radio play. Killer Frequency gives you a new way to look and interact with true crime fiction. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite crime thriller video game? Killer Frequency ends up being a really compelling thriller, but it's far from the only one. and I can't wait to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back next week with a review of that new Stasis game and a whole lot more. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,